for example, at the example you used right now, it's not, the regulations are not in place to protect the consumer. It's not like, okay, that food is not good enough, there are chemicals in it or anything like that, where the regulators say, okay, this is unhealthy, we can't allow this on our market. But it's like a completely different take, where you say, if the consumer would be eating food out of Africa or from the European farmers, it would, for the health aspect, not make a difference. Do you take that correctly?
I mean, it's both. If we're honest,
Yeah.
it can be both, right? So you may have a level playing field where you say, okay, these are the basic food safety regulations that everyone needs to follow, and that is considered as a trade barrier, but a non-tariff trade barrier. But at the end of the day, this is not how the EU system works at the moment. We still have quotas in place from specific countries where we cap the maximum number of imports that we allow, even though those imports may be totally compatible with all other types of food and safety regulations that are prevalent in the EU. We cap those imports because we are afraid that if cheaper imports come into the European single market, then it's going to damage our domestic producers. But even when you mentioned food safety and how regulation can help there, sure, we don't want our own citizens to be poisoned. I think it's fair enough to say that the basic level of safety in such an important sector should be ensured, but they shouldn't apply selectively. They should be universal to all producers, whether they're based in the EU, Africa, or anywhere else in the world.
Okay. I think that's a normal take. I think it should be a stance that is broadly accepted. Isn't there a bit of the issue that the different countries, like for example the USA, have a different take on, okay, what is okay than the Europeans? It's like, do you see a method of finding the right line to say, okay, this is the level playing field that we all could be playing? Because that's like one of the issues that I see as someone who's not that involved, that is like, well, those people say it's okay and those people say no, it's not okay, that is already way too bad. Do you guys have some idea on how to get that issue resolved?
Sure. So what you're essentially talking about are the different regulatory environments and how trade can happen between different regulatory environments. I'm a massive proponent of free trade. I think we should be aiming to reduce these non-tariff trade barriers just as much as we are trying to reduce trade barriers. Because at the end of the day, it does benefit our own citizens if there is more competition in the market. So you have mentioned the United States as an example, which is a developed country with high life expectancy, good food safety records, but no free trade agreement with the European Union. Two of the biggest markets in the world, geopolitical allies, good friends, but there is no free trade between the United States and the European Union. I think that's a massive mistake on both sides. And I'm actually blaming both sides equally or almost equally because both of them have strong protectionist tendencies in different areas. So when it comes to food safety and agriculture imports, the United States is massively subsidizing its own farmers, and so does the European Union. When it comes to the food safety aspect, though, I think there is a lot of panic and there is a lot of unjust opposition to American food imports to the EU. What's the history behind it and why that may develop? I'm not entirely sure, but I think if we actually give individuals the choice and say, all right, you're welcome to eat any American product in the EU single market without any kind of restriction, it will have a massive US flag on it and be labeled that this particular product has been following US regulations rather than EU regulations. Then I think we can both agree that a lot of individuals would be very happy to choose the American one if they think that the quality is superior, or if the pricing is better. So I don't think that the average citizen would be worried to drink or eat anything coming from the United States. But of course, a lot of the lobby industries are interested in restricting competition, and there is a lot of, I think, unscientific worry about some of the US imports, whether it's genetically modified plants or whether it's chlorinated chicken. But I think these worries are not the worries of the average European citizen, but more industry worries about increased competition.
Okay. Could you help me, like, imagine the average Joe, like you've got a lot of experience in the markets and with the economy. It's like, could you help me paint a picture for the average Joe? In today's times, the inflation is catastrophic. Many people, energy, housing, food, everything is getting more expensive. It's like, could you help me paint a picture for the average Joe? Like, what would be the consequences if we opened the markets in the way you described right now? Like, what would change for the average consumer in Europe if we said, okay, you know what? We're going to open the market. You're going to, nice idea with the stick the US flag on the product. Just say, hey, listen, these products are made with their regulations. These products are made with our regulations. What would change? Would the products become cheaper? Is it just, okay, you get a few new products with new tastes, or what could we expect to change on the market thanks to this free trade? That's a curious thing I would be curious about.
I think three main things would change if these free market reforms were implemented. First, a reduction of prices. Second, increased competition. And third, higher quality and cheaper domestic production. So just a couple of words about each. I think the decreased prices would happen partially because of the increased competition, partially because of the reduction in some of the tariff rates. So at the moment, as mentioned, there is a cap in terms of the agriculture imports that third countries outside of the EU can export to the single market. If these caps were removed and people would be able to freely export to the European Union, then prices would end up falling at the shops. Why I think that there would be more choice and more consumer opportunity to try new products? Well, again, same reason. If you actually have more exporters into the European single market, then it's inevitably going to lead to more choice and more product variety. Why I think some of the European consumers would increase the quality of their goods or decrease their prices? Well, again, this is a result of competition. We have seen that in so many different sectors. When the EU started to liberalize the aviation sector, and it wasn't only the national flag carriers that were allowed to fly around, but new airlines could enter the market. This is what we have immediately seen. Prices started to fall. There was more choice for consumers, and the incumbents in the market also started to provide better products at cheaper prices, because suddenly they found that there is some competition going on and they need to be better in order to stay in business. So the EU actually has a good track record of liberalizing certain parts of the economy. And all I'm saying is that we should be building on that positive track record and introduce that in other markets, like the energy market, like food imports, or housing, for example, where still the government regulations are very much inducing elevated price levels and stop companies from productively competing with one another.
Really, in the housing market too? There are many. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Of course. So I'm currently calling you from London, which is one of the most expensive cities when it comes to buying or renting a flat. And London has very much imposed a vast number of regulations how houses can be built, where houses can be built, by whom they can be built. And as a result, we see that there is at least 3 million dwelling units missing from the housing market here. The consequences are dire. So anyone my age without any kind of family wealth, it's impossible for them to buy a house, and it's almost impossible for them to rent a flat by themselves without any kind of help. So the average citizen here spends 50% of their income on rent, which is a crazy number, and it's getting higher and higher every year. And that's all because the government, including the central and local governments, are artificially constraining supply, even though the demand is there. So housing is now a massive issue that needs to be resolved, unfortunately, not just here in London, but in many, many European capitals.